The harsh summer sun beat down on Tessa Wells as she sat on her worn leather trunk at Dry Creek Station, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. The tears streaking down her face left pale tracks in the dust that had settled on her skin during the 3-day journey from Kansas City. She had arrived to nothing but heartbreak. Travelers and station workers moved around her, casting curious glances but keeping their distance. Tessa had been sitting there for nearly 2 hours, her black morning dress soaking up the heat like a punishment she deserved to endure. The telegram clutched in her trembling hand had become damp with sweat and tears. "Madam," a station attendant had said earlier, "the next eastbound train won't be here for 3 days. You can't just stay sitting here." But where else could she go? Her husband's homestead, the one he'd written about so proudly in his letters, didn't exist. There was nothing but an empty plot of land with a half-dug well and the beginnings of a foundation. James had died before he could build their dream. And now, with no home and dwindling funds, Tessa was stranded in the unforgiving Wyoming Territory of 1876. She didn't notice the tall figure approaching until his shadow fell across her. Looking up through swollen eyes, she saw a man standing before her, his face partially obscured by the wide brim of his weather-beaten hat. His posture was straight but relaxed, the stance of someone comfortable in his own skin, despite the 2 revolvers holstered at his hips. Without a word, he bent down and lifted her trunk with one hand. Then, just as silently, he offered his other hand to her. When she didn't take it, frozen in confusion, he simply reached down and lifted her to her feet with surprising gentleness. Tessa began, but her voice cracked. The stranger didn't wait for her to find her words. He carried her trunk to a wagon parked nearby, loaded it into the back, and then returned. Without ceremony, he lifted her into the passenger seat as if she weighed nothing. Tessa was too exhausted to protest as he climbed up beside her, took the reins, and set the wagon in motion. It wasn't until they had left the station behind that he finally spoke. "Name's Archer O'Malley," he said, his voice deep and rough like water over stones. "You looked like you needed help." Tessa clutched her telegram tighter. "I don't accept charity from strangers, Mr. O'Malley." A hint of a smile touched his lips. "Not offering charity. Offering shelter for the night. Got a ranch about an hour's ride from here. You can decide what to do come morning." His profile was strong jaw covered in a short beard that didn't quite hide a scar running along the edge, nose that had been broken at least once, and eyes the color of faded denim that seemed to catch every movement around them. He wasn't handsome in the conventional sense, but there was something compelling about his weathered features. "I'm Tessa Wells," she said finally. "My husband, he died 2 months ago, pneumonia. I came to join him at our homestead, but—" She gestured helplessly with the telegram. Archer nodded once, not pressing for more. Wyoming Territory's not kind to those who come unprepared. They rode in silence for a while, the creaking of the wagon and the steady plodding of the horses the only sounds between them. Tessa studied the landscape, rolling hills covered in sage and prairie grass, distant mountains forming a jagged line against the sky. It was beautiful in its starkness, so different from the lush green of Missouri where she'd grown up. "Were you born out here?" she asked eventually, unable to bear the silence any longer. "No, Virginia originally, came west after the war between the states." Tessa wondered which side he'd fought for but didn't ask. Some wounds were still too fresh, even 11 years later. "What made you stay?" she asked instead. Archer was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. Then he pointed to the horizon. "Space. Freedom. Out here, a man is judged by what he does, not who his daddy was or which side he fought for." The simple honesty in his words resonated with her. She had come west for similar reasons, to escape the pitying looks, the whispers about poor widow Wells, the smothering concern of family who thought they knew what was best for her. "I understand," she said softly. His eyes flicked to her briefly, a flash of surprise in them, before returning to the trail ahead. "Most don't." As they crested a small rise, Archer's ranch came into view. It wasn't grand, but it was substantial, a sturdy main house built of logs with a stone chimney, a large barn, corrals, and several outbuildings. A creek wound through the property with cottonwoods marking its path like sentinels. "It's lovely," Tessa said, genuinely impressed. "Built it myself." Every log, every nail. There was quiet pride in his voice. Started with just a tent and 2 horses. As they approached, a lanky young man emerged from the barn. He raised a hand in greeting as Archer pulled the wagon to a stop in the yard. "Charlie," Archer called, "we have a guest." "See to the horses, would you?" The young man nodded, his curious gaze lingering on Tessa before he came forward to take the reins. "This is Charlie Baxter," Archer said. "Works for me. Charlie, Mrs. Tessa Wells." "Madam," Charlie said, touching the brim of his hat. He couldn't be more than 19, with a shock of red hair and freckles scattered across his nose. Archer helped Tessa down from the wagon, his hands strong and steady around her waist. The brief contact sent an unexpected warmth through her that she immediately tried to dismiss. She was a widow still in mourning. Such feelings were inappropriate. "Let me show you inside," Archer said, retrieving her trunk from the wagon. The interior of the house was surprisingly comfortable. The main room served as both kitchen and living area with a large hearth dominating one wall. A solid table with 4 chairs stood in the center, and a rocking chair was positioned near the fire. Shelves lined another wall, filled with books more than Tessa would have expected to find in a cowboy's home. "You read," she said, unable to keep the surprise from her voice. Archer set her trunk down. Winter nights are long, not much else to do when the snow's 10 feet deep. He showed her to a small bedroom off the main room. "You can sleep here. It's not much, but it's clean." The room was simple, a narrow bed with a patchwork quilt, a small chest of drawers, and a washstand with a pitcher and bowl. A window overlooked the creek, and someone had placed a jar of wildflowers on the sill. "Thank you," Tessa said, touched by the unexpected thoughtfulness. "This is more than generous. Get yourself settled. Supper in an hour." He left her alone, closing the door behind him. Tessa sank onto the bed, the events of the day suddenly crashing down on her. She should be frightened or at least wary, alone in a stranger's home miles from anywhere. But instead, she felt an odd sense of safety. Perhaps it was exhaustion clouding her judgment, or perhaps there was something trustworthy about Archer O'Malley's straightforward manner. She washed her face and hands in the cool water from the pitcher, changed into her one other dress, a navy blue that was slightly less formal than her black morning attire, and tried to make herself presentable. When she emerged from the bedroom, she found Archer at the stove, stirring something that smelled delicious. "I hope you don't mind," she said, stepping forward. "I could help with the cooking." "Already done," he replied, gesturing to the table where 2 bowls of stew steamed alongside a plate of biscuits. "It's nothing fancy." They ate in companionable silence at first, but as the meal progressed, Tessa found herself telling Archer about her journey west. How she'd sold most of her possessions to purchase the train ticket. How she'd been corresponding with James for months as he established their homestead. How the telegram informing her of his death had arrived just as she was preparing to leave, but she'd decided to come anyway. "I had nowhere else to go," she admitted. "My parents are gone. My sister is married with 5 children in a house barely big enough for them. I thought I could still make something of the land James claimed, but when I arrived and saw there was nothing there." Her voice trailed off. Archer listened without interrupting, his expression thoughtful. When she finished, he refilled her coffee cup before speaking. "Homesteading alone is near impossible, especially for a woman," he said, his tone matter-of-fact rather than condescending. "But selling the claim might give you enough to start over somewhere else. Dry Creek's growing. They need teachers, seamstresses." "I was a teacher before I married," Tessa said, surprised by his insight, "but I can't sell what isn't built." "The claim will revert to the government since James didn't fulfill the requirements." Archer frowned. "That's not right. Your husband started the work, died trying to build something. You should get something for that." His sense of justice touched her. Life isn't always fair, Mr. O'Malley. Archer, he corrected. And no, it's not, but sometimes we can make it a little more so. The conversation shifted to lighter topics as they finished their meal. Archer told her about his herd of cattle, about the challenges of ranching in a territory where winters could kill half your stock and summers could dry up your water source. He spoke with passion about the land, about his plans to expand his operation, about the changes coming with the railroad pushing ever westward. As darkness fell, he lit lamps and built up the fire. The warm glow made the room seem smaller, more intimate. Tessa found herself studying him when he wasn't looking, the way his hands moved with confident efficiency, the way he seemed perfectly at ease in his own space, the occasional small smile that transformed his rugged features. "I should turn in," she said eventually, feeling suddenly self-conscious. "It's been a long day," Archer nodded. "Sleep well, Mrs. Wells." "Tessa," she offered. "Please call me Tessa." Something flickered in his eyes, surprise, perhaps, or appreciation. "Tessa, then, good night." She retreated to the small bedroom, listening as he moved around the main room, banking the fire for the night. Through the thin door, she heard him leave, presumably to sleep in one of the outbuildings to give her privacy in the house. The thoughtfulness of the gesture wasn't lost on her. As she lay in the unfamiliar bed, staring at the ceiling, Tessa wondered what tomorrow would bring. For the first time since receiving news of James's death, she felt a small spark of hope. Not happiness, not yet, but a sense that perhaps there could be a future for her after all. Morning came with the crowing of a rooster and the sounds of the ranch awakening. Tessa dressed quickly and stepped out into the main room to find Archer already gone. Coffee was brewing on the stove, and a plate of biscuits sat covered on the table with a note beside them. "Help yourself." Back by midday. She ate, then ventured outside. The day was clear and bright, the air crisp despite the promise of heat to come. Charlie was in the corral, working with a young horse, while several cowboys she hadn't seen the night before were saddling their mounts near the barn. Not wanting to intrude, Tessa walked down to the creek. She sat on a large rock watching the water flow past, thinking about her situation. By the time she heard footsteps approaching, the sun had risen high in the sky. "Thought I might find you here," Archer said, settling beside her on the rock. He'd been riding, his clothes were dusty, and he smelled of horses and open air. "It's peaceful," she replied. "Gives me space to think." "And have you decided what you'll do?" Tessa sighed. "I don't know, go back east, I suppose, find work somewhere." Archer was quiet for a moment, tossing a small stone into the creek. "I've been thinking about your situation. Your husband's claim, you said it's near Dry Creek." "Yes, about 5 miles north. I know that area. Good water, decent soil, shame to let it go to waste." Tessa looked at him curiously. "What are you suggesting?" "I could help you," he said, meeting her gaze directly. "Build the cabin, dig the well properly, plow some land. Get it to where you could sell it for a fair price at least." She stared at him, stunned by the offer. "Why would you do that?" Archer looked away, back to the flowing water. "Because someone should have done the same for my sister when her husband died at Gettysburg. Instead, she lost everything." The personal admission surprised her. It was the most he'd revealed about himself since they'd met. "I can't accept such charity," Tessa said, though part of her desperately wanted to, not charity, partnership. He turned to face her again. "You hold the claim, I provide the labor and materials. We split whatever you get from the sale." It was a fair offer, more than fair. But still, she hesitated. "It would take weeks, at least." "A month, probably," he agreed. "You could stay here, help around the ranch to earn your keep if it makes you feel better." The proposition was tempting. A month to catch her breath, to figure out her next steps, to potentially walk away with enough money to start fresh. "Why are you really doing this, Archer?" she asked softly. He held her gaze, something vulnerable flickering behind his usual reserve. "Because when I saw you sitting at that station, I recognized something in you, a kind of strength that doesn't break, just bends for a while." His words touched something deep inside her. "I'll consider your offer," she said finally. Archer nodded, apparently satisfied. "Take your time." No need to decide today. But by evening, Tessa had made up her mind. The alternative, returning east with nothing, was too disheartening to contemplate, and something about Archer O'Malley made her trust him in a way she couldn't quite explain. "I accept your proposal," she told him as they sat by the fire after supper. "But I insist on working while I'm here. I can cook, clean, mend clothing. I'm a quick learner if there are other tasks I could help with." A rare smile spread across his face. "Deal," he said, extending his hand. When she placed her smaller hand in his, the contact sent that same unexpected warmth through her. This time, she didn't try to dismiss it quite so quickly. The days settled into a routine. Archer rode out early most mornings, taking Charlie and the other ranch hands with him to work with the cattle. Tessa took over the cooking and housekeeping, grateful to have meaningful work to occupy her hands and mind. In the afternoons, when Archer returned, they would ride together to her claim, where he worked steadily on constructing a simple cabin. Tessa learned to ride properly on a gentle mare Archer provided. She discovered muscles she never knew she had as she helped him with the building, holding boards in place while he nailed them, learning to mix mortar for the chimney, fetching water from the nearby creek. They talked as they worked about books they'd read, places they'd seen, experiences that had shaped them. Archer told her about fighting for the Confederacy, about the disillusionment that had sent him west after the war, about building his ranch from nothing. Tessa shared stories of her teaching days, of her brief marriage to James, of her dreams for a future that now seemed out of reach. "Why didn't you ever marry?" she asked him one afternoon as they sat in the shade of a cottonwood, taking a break from their labors. Archer wiped sweat from his brow. "Came close once. Clara was her name, daughter of a neighboring rancher, but she couldn't stand the isolation, moved to Denver, married a banker." "I'm sorry," Tessa said, hearing the old hurt in his voice. He shrugged. "For the best. She wouldn't have been happy here. And I can't imagine living anywhere else now." Tessa looked around at the rolling landscape. "I think I understand. There's something about this place. It gets under your skin." Archer glanced at her, surprise evident in his expression. "Most women can't wait to leave." "I'm not most women," she replied, surprising herself with the flirtatious tone that had crept into her voice. A slow smile spread across his face. "No, you certainly are not." The moment hung between them, charged with something neither of them was quite ready to name. As the weeks passed, the cabin took shape, a solid one-room structure with a stone chimney and a front porch. Archer dug out the half-finished well, lined it properly, and struck water. He plowed an acre of land for a future garden and repaired the boundary markers of the claim. And with each passing day, Tessa found herself more drawn to this quiet, steady man. She noticed the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the gentleness in his hands when he worked with animals, the respect he showed to everyone from Charlie to the old Shoshone man who occasionally brought game to trade. She began to linger in the kitchen when he came in for coffee, to find excuses to be near him in the evenings. Sometimes she would catch him watching her when he thought she wasn't looking, a warmth in his gaze that made her heart beat faster. One evening, nearly 3 weeks into her stay, Tessa sat on the porch of Archer's ranch house, mending one of his shirts. The sunset painted the sky in vivid oranges and pinks, and a cool breeze offered relief from the day's heat. Archer emerged from the barn and crossed the yard toward her. He'd been breaking a new horse all afternoon, and fatigue was evident in the set of his shoulders. Still, he smiled when he saw her. "That's the third shirt you've fixed this week," he said, settling into the chair beside her. "I'll have nothing left to wear out at this rate." Tessa laughed. "Perhaps you should be more careful with your clothing, then." "Perhaps." He stretched his long legs out before him. "Cabin's nearly done, another week, maybe less." The reminder that her time at the ranch was limited sent an unexpected pang through Tessa's heart. "Yes, it's coming along wonderfully." "Had word from town today," Archer continued. "New family arriving next month looking to establish a large farm. They might be interested in buying a ready-made homestead." "That's Good news, Tessa said, trying to sound enthusiastic. The prospect of selling the claim and moving on suddenly seemed less appealing than it had just weeks ago. Archer studied her face, his expression thoughtful. Unless you've changed your mind about selling, she set the mending aside. What else would I do with it? I can't work the land alone. No, he agreed. Not alone. Something in his tone made her look up sharply. Their eyes met, and the intensity in his gaze took her breath away. Archer, before she could continue, Charlie came running up from the corral. Boss, that new stallion's got loose and is heading for the mares. Archer was on his feet instantly. We'll finish this conversation later, he told Tessa, then hurried off to deal with the crisis. But later didn't come that evening. By the time the stallion was secured again, a summer storm had blown in, forcing everyone to take shelter. Tessa lay awake listening to the rain pound on the roof, wondering what Archer had been about to say. The next morning dawned clear and fresh, the landscape washed clean by the storm. Tessa was in the kitchen making breakfast when Archer appeared in the doorway, his hair still damp from washing. "Good morning," she said, suddenly feeling shy. "Morning." He poured himself coffee, watching her over the rim of his cup. About yesterday, a loud knock at the door interrupted him. Charlie entered without waiting for a response, his face flushed with excitement. "Riders coming in, boss." "Looks like trouble." Archer was instantly alert. "How many?" "4 men, armed, don't recognize them." "Stay inside," Archer told Tessa, his expression serious. "Both of you." He strapped on his gun belt and strode out to meet the approaching riders. Through the window, Tessa watched as 4 rough-looking men reined their horses to a stop in the yard. The leader, a heavy-set man with a bushy beard, leaned forward in his saddle, saying something she couldn't hear. Whatever it was made Archer's posture stiffen. She saw him shake his head, his hand resting casually near one of his revolvers. "What do they want?" she whispered to Charlie. The young man's face was grim. "Probably the usual, water rights, grazing access. Boss has had trouble before with ranchers trying to push him out." The conversation outside was growing heated. The bearded man pointed toward the hills, his voice rising loud enough for Tessa to catch fragments. "Claim that land fair and square, no right to build there." With a cold shock, she realized they were talking about her homestead claim. "Widow has legal rights to it," she heard Archer respond firmly. "Papers are filed properly." The bearded man spat on the ground. "Papers don't mean nothing out here. That's Blackwell Range, always has been." "The government says differently," Archer replied, his voice level but carrying a dangerous edge. Tessa couldn't stand it any longer. Despite Charlie's protests, she stepped outside onto the porch. All eyes turned to her. "Mrs. Wells," Archer said, his tone warning her to stay back. "These men were just leaving." "Like hell we are," the bearded man growled. "This ain't over, O'Malley." "Actually, I believe it is," Tessa said, moving to stand beside Archer. "That land was granted to my husband under the Homestead Act. His claim, my claim now, is legal and binding." The bearded man's eyes narrowed. "Lady, you don't want to get mixed up in this." "I already am mixed up in this," she replied evenly, "and I have no intention of being intimidated." Archer gave her a quick, approving glance before returning his attention to the riders. "You heard the lady. Now ride out, Blackwell, before this gets ugly." The tension stretched like a wire about to snap. Then, with a muttered curse, Blackwell jerked his horse around. "This ain't the end," he called over his shoulder as the 4 men rode away. Once they were out of sight, Archer turned to Tessa. "That was either very brave or very foolish." "Perhaps a bit of both," she admitted, her heart still racing. "Who were they?" "Jeb Blackwell and his sons. Own the next ranch over. They've been trying to expand their grazing land for years, legal or not." Archer's expression was grim. "They've had their eye on your claim for a while, I suspect. Good water source there. Will they be back, eventually? But not right away. Blackwell's all bluster until he's had time to work himself up." He studied her face. "This doesn't change your situation, except to make selling more complicated. Blackwell will try to scare off any potential buyers." Tessa considered this new development. Then perhaps selling isn't the answer after all. Archer raised an eyebrow. What are you thinking? I'm thinking, she said slowly, that I don't like being bullied, and I'm thinking that maybe Wyoming isn't so terrible after all. A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. Is that so? Yes, she said, meeting his gaze steadily, but I meant what I said before. I can't work that land alone. Archer took a step closer to her. And I meant what I was trying to say last night. You wouldn't have to be alone. Tessa's breath caught. What exactly are you proposing, Archer O'Malley? A different kind of partnership, he said, his voice low. One that's permanent. Hope bloomed in her chest. Are you asking me to marry you? I'm not much good with fancy words, he admitted. But yes, these past weeks, I've come to care for you, Tessa, more than I thought possible. She searched his face, seeing the vulnerability beneath his usual confident exterior. I care for you too, she whispered, but this is so sudden, we barely know each other. We know the important things, he countered. We know how we work together, how we talk together, the rest, that comes with time. And the homestead, we could work both properties, expand the ranch. Build something together. He reached for her hand, his touch gentle. I know you're still grieving for your husband. I'm not asking you to forget him, just to consider a future that might include me. Tessa looked down at their joined hands, then back up at his face. In his eyes she saw honesty, strength, and something more, a tenderness that made her heart swell. Yes, she said simply. Surprise and joy transformed his features. Yes, I'll marry you, she smiled, feeling lighter than she had in months. But not because I need protection from men like Blackwell, because I want to build that future with you. Archer's smile matched her own. Slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished, he leaned down and kissed her. It was gentle at first, then deepened as she responded, her arms sliding around his neck. When they finally broke apart, both slightly breathless, Charlie's whoop of delight from the doorway made them laugh. About time, the young man called, grinning widely. Word of their engagement spread quickly through the small community. Most reactions were supportive. Archer was well respected, and people were happy to see the lonely rancher find companionship. Even those who raised eyebrows at the speed of the courtship kept their opinions mostly to themselves. They married 2 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the small church in Dry Creek, with Charlie standing as Archer's best man and the shopkeeper's wife, Martha, attending Tessa. The celebration afterward at the ranch was attended by neighbors from miles around, curious to meet the woman who had captured the heart of the reserved Archer O'Malley. As the last guests departed and twilight settled over the land, Tessa and Archer stood on the porch of what was now their home together. Happy? He asked, his arm around her waist. Very, she replied, leaning into him. Though I never imagined when I arrived at that station that this is where I'd end up. Life has a way of surprising us, Archer said, pressing a kiss to her temple. Sometimes for the better. Tessa thought about the journey that had brought her here, the grief, the uncertainty, the moment when a stranger had lifted her into his wagon without a word, changing the course of her life forever. For the better, she agreed, turning in his arms to kiss him properly. Definitely for the better. In the years that followed, the O'Malley Ranch prospered. Tessa and Archer built a new, larger cabin on her homestead claim and expanded his original ranch house. They successfully fought off Blackwell's attempts to intimidate them, eventually reaching an uneasy peace with their neighbors. Tessa discovered skills she never knew she possessed. She could ride as well as any man on the ranch, help with calving season, and still manage their growing household. When she began teaching the children of nearby homesteaders 3 days a week, she found a perfect balance between her old life and her new one. And on cool evenings when the work was done, she and Archer would sit on their porch watching the sunset, their hands intertwined, sometimes talking, sometimes simply existing together in comfortable silence. Life in the Wyoming Territory was never easy. There were harsh winters, dry summers, threats from rustlers and land grabbers. But they faced each challenge side by side, their partnership growing stronger with each passing season. 5 years after their wedding, as they sat watching their 3-year-old son Thomas playing with the ranch dogs in the yard, Tessa thought back to that day at Dry Creek Station. "I never thanked you properly," she said to Archer. "For what?" he asked, his arm around her shoulders. "For stopping that day, for lifting me into your wagon when I was at my lowest point." Archer smiled, the lines at the corners of his eyes deepening. "Best decision I ever made." "Why did you do it?" she asked, a question she'd wondered about many times. "You could have just ridden past like everyone else." He considered for a moment. "I saw something in your face, a kind of strength, even in your sorrow, something that called to me." He squeezed her shoulder gently. "Or maybe I just couldn't bear to see such a pretty woman crying." Tessa laughed and leaned her head against him. "Either way, I'm grateful. From disaster had come unexpected joy. From endings had come new beginnings. And from a chance encounter at a dusty station had come a love that would sustain them through all the challenges the frontier could throw their way." As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, Tessa Wells O'Malley knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be.